Welcome, everyone. Welcome to folks coming in. Nice to see you all. Lots of familiar names. Welcome, everyone. As you're entering, if you would drop into the chat who you are, what organization you're with, where you are in the world. It's always nice to see who's here, and I think it's great for everyone to get a sense of who else is here with them. We're building a really strong and big food rescue community right now. It's exciting to see so many more groups popping up. Welcome. We'll give it another maybe 60 seconds or so, maybe a minute or two while we let folks join, find their link. Okay, there's still folks coming in at a good clip, so we are gonna just wait a minute. Drop your name and your organization in the chat. Welcome. Okay. Okay, I think we can go ahead and just get started with some of the introductions. Jake, if you want to hit the next slide. Just a reminder, as we go along, if you have questions, if you can put them in the Q&A, not in the chat, it's easier for us to kind of keep track of what the questions are. If they're in the chat, sometimes they just scroll past and we don't see them. Yeah, we will provide the link at the end of the webinar to request a follow-up meeting if you want to meet with somebody from Food Rescue Hero, a link to sign up for our February webinar, and then, of course, the presentation will be emailed out as usual sometime within the next week. Okay, so actually go back 2 slides, Jake. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro here. So I wanted to talk about what food recovery actually is, because I've noticed in a lot of conversations when I go to talk to elected officials or even foundations, sometimes even people in the charitable food space, they don't really quite grasp what we're talking about when we say food recovery. And I think it's really important that we create a baseline understanding of what food recovery is and why it matters, why it's different from other solutions that are out there, and sort of how to change that conversation. So now, Jake, if you can go ahead. There we go. So when we talk about food recovery, what a lot of people think it is your neighborhood church or pantry that is going to the grocery store once a week and picking up food because they have either a distribution or or they serve a population in need, and so they're going to get food that day to help feed the people that need to be fed. Jake hit the thing is that, and that is traditionally kind of part of food recovery, but really looking at it from that perspective, that's a focus on the needs of people and nonprofits. Those churches and pantries are going to the grocery store to pick up food because they're serving people that need food. And that's their goal with picking up food. If they no longer had people that needed food, they would no longer need to pick up that food. It would sort of drop off their radar. When we talk about food recovery, what we're really talking about isn't that one rescue. We're talking about a system approach that is focusing on both reducing hunger and reducing food waste. And it's that critical juncture that we have two main goals: reducing hunger and reducing food waste. Both of those are equally important in the mission of food recovery. And again, we're also not talking about a one-off. We're talking about a systemic approach to solving those issues. So let's look at the food waste side of this. We're all kind of familiar with this. These numbers, I think, I've seen different numbers around. I think the consumer-facing business food waste is actually shrinking because of the growth of the food recovery industry. But in general, when we talk about food recovery as an industry, as a system, we're talking about addressing food waste at that consumer-facing business spot, like right there. And those retail locations are grocery stores and Walmarts and cafes and bakeries, et cetera, et cetera. That food waste that's happening at that consumer-facing business level is a highly distributed network. It's happening all over the place at a lot of different locations. So I pulled these numbers. There are 26,000 conventional supermarkets. That's your Albertsons, your Kroger's, your Giant Eagles, your Hannaford's, right? There's another 4,000 super centers. Those are Walmarts and Targets, all of which also are now offering groceries. You got 3,000 natural and gourmet stores, your Whole Foods, your I'm not sure if Trader Joe's are included in that. And then 150,000 convenience stores. Again, your Sheetz, your Wawas, your Get-Go's, your Come and Go's, I forget the other brands. And again, that food waste that's happening at those thousands and thousands and thousands of locations, right? We're approaching 200,000 locations, and I don't think that includes restaurants and uh, bakeries and things like that, is happening in a highly distributed network. Jake, can you advance? So, for example, this is a map of just the Walmarts, right? And those Walmarts were 5,000 of that almost 200,000 locations. So imagine that huge, expansive network where food is being wasted. And if we want to focus on food waste, the food waste side of food recovery and ending food waste, that's a huge network from which we need to be getting food that's getting wasted. And of course, food is wasted 7 days a week, right? So that means that 7 days a week in some, probably not all, but let's say some of those 200,000 locations, food is being wasted every single day of the week. That is a huge logistical problem. Now, the charitable food system, so if we flip and we look at the hunger side of it, it really developed in the 1960s and 70s. So we started the history of the charitable food system. The history of charity, to be honest, is just awful. It was really punitive for a long time. There was a proliferation of soup kitchens, which was actually an advancement in the 20s, I'm sorry, in the 30s around the Great Depression. And then in the 60s, the charitable food system was sort of professionalized and focused with the advent of food banks. And again, you also saw a proliferation of those in the 80s as the industrial systems kind of collapsed in some of the northern United States, and you got Rust Belt cities where, again, it was this huge crisis. And so you needed a way to feed people. If you can switch, Jake. That model that they developed, that sort of like professionalization of the charitable food system, was a really smart innovation. It was focused on scale and it was focused on efficiency. So it was really developed in, along the industrial model, the hub and spoke. So you've got, factories and warehouses that are concentrating food, and then you've got trucks taking those to a food bank, which is another hub for that wheel. And then from the food bank, they're taking it out to the food pantries. Again, it's a focus on efficiency and scale and on feeding a lot of people. This model, which is the backbone of our charitable food system, however, can't really account for smaller quantities of food, for highly perishable food, and for food that needs to be moved on an unpredictable frequency, because you've got schedules, you've got trucks, you've got routes. Next. So, and the other thing about food waste, when you put these together, and why food waste requires a sort of innovation on the existing solution, is that 80 to 90% of the food that is rescued is perishable. I mean, that's why it's being rescued, right? Yellow bananas. Nobody wants to buy yellow bananas. The food that we're rescuing, it's not bad, but people aren't going to buy it in the grocery store. When you go grocery shopping, you want vegetables and fruits and perishables that are going to last for a week, right? You're not going to eat all of the groceries that you buy the next day. So that's why when grocery stores, for example, have to cull, they're pulling things that need to be eaten within the next 24, 48, 36 went backwards, in 72 hours, right? They've got a couple of days on them. And that doesn't really work in that hub and spoke model, right? If you pick up that food from a grocery store, it needs to be gotten somewhere quickly. You don't have time to take it back necessarily to a food bank and then take it to a food pantry and then get it to somebody's house. Next slide. So solving the food waste problem through food recovery requires rethinking both the logistics of pickup. That's that highly distributed network. How are we going to get all of that food picked up in small quantities, in unreliable frequency or inconsistent frequency, in this huge highly distributed network? And then how are we going to get it to people who can use it where it won't be thrown away, right? Who can eat it in time? Because if you pick up groceries at a grocery store, donated groceries, and you take so long to get them to people that they're garbage when they get there, you haven't solved the food waste problem. You've just wasted your organizational resources. So we need to rethink both the logistics of pickup and the logistics of distribution. Next slide. So for pickup logistics, again, I talked a little bit about this, but the change is that you need to be able to accommodate variable pickup size. So it could be one tray of sandwiches today. It could be 100 pounds tomorrow. You also have variable pickup size and small sizes across different pickup points, right? So you could have a tray of sandwiches at one location and a pallet of bananas at another. That variable frequency, is it going to be an everyday pickup, or what's going to happen if you have a caterer that needs a pickup because somebody canceled something, right? That's not scheduled. You need to be able to have that sort of last minute logistic ability. One-time availability, again, that goes back to that caterer, that highly distributed pickup locations, and then your solution to all of these logistics has to be something that nonprofits can afford. Can you afford to hire a truck and a truck driver, or enough trucks and enough truck drivers to pick up from those 200,000 locations every day? What would that cost the charitable system? Next. The solution is a flexible donation transportation. And you guys are doing this, right? I'm not telling you if you're doing food recovery at scale, you're already doing this, but this is what we need to get our funders, our politicians, our supporters to understand why what we're doing is an innovation and why we're doing it this way, right? So that flexible donation transportation that we're providing, it gives us weekly rescues for those grocery stores that, yes, we're going to waste food 7 days a week, Monday through Sunday. Can you come pick up? We can do that. We can set that schedule. Those one-time donations for those caterers or for that grocery store that suddenly has an overage, they need to be able to have an outlet to call you and say, oh, I have something today, that I didn't know I'd have. That 7-day-a-week pickup. That pallet and truck capacity, because again, you've got some of the distributors that are wasting by the pallet load. You've got Walmarts, Targets, and some of the Trader Joe's and some of the Whole Foods that are really putting together almost a pallet, and may require a truck capacity. And reliable pickups for the donors. And this is key. This is a key differentiator because we are focused in food recovery, not just on making sure people get fed, but we're focused on making sure food doesn't go to waste. That means that those donors, when they collect that food for pickup, we're picking it up. We're making good on that promise to pick up that food. And that really matters to those donors, especially you look at somewhere like California or New York that have these laws that are requiring people to donate their food. They need to know you're going to show up because they're going to get dinged with a fine if we don't pick it up. And because we're focused on reducing food waste and on making sure that that food is actually picked up and gotten where it will be used, we provide that reliable pickup for donors. And ultimately, to do all of this, it really is going to end up relying on a combo, therefore a flexible donation transportation system that is using trucks and volunteers. On the flip side, distribution logistics also need to be rethought. Distribution is the part that a lot of people outside food recovery don't think about. And I know everybody on this call knows this. You've gone through this. You've had a pallet of ripe bananas. You've had one tray of sandwiches. You've had, wildly varying donations that you've needed to place, and you need a flexible network of distribution partners to make that happen. You need to be able to have partners that will take variable donation sizes. Taking a tray of sandwiches to a site that feeds 500 families, I mean, sure, the sandwiches are going to get used and they're not going to be wasted, but that's hardly going to do anything for that nonprofit, that place that's serving 500 families. Likewise, let's say a drop-in center for homeless youth that serves 15 people a day, they don't want a pallet of bananas. They don't want even one case of cucumbers. That sandwich or that tray of sandwiches is perfect for them though, right? So you need that flexibility for those variable donation size. You need people that can take donations 7 days a week, right? And we know this is one of the hardest things that the sort of traditional distribution network has to deal with is who's open on Sunday to take this? Who's going to take the rescue on Saturday? What happens when a distribution partner, like a big warehouse, has a couple of pallets of something on a Friday? They're not going to make it till Tuesday when a lot of the traditional charitable network locations like food banks and pantries are back open up. We need to be able to handle short shelf life. Again, they're pulling those bananas off the shelf when they're yellow. Yellow bananas, they got to get to somebody or they're not going to be any good. Same thing with things like sandwiches or prepared food or milk. There's also a variable overall donation of food. As we all know, there's sort of a consistent base. You've got your donors that are donating consistently, but what do you do when somebody calls with 10,000 pounds of cucumbers? You need a distribution network that can flex up to take those, unexpected, unplanned, massive fresh food donations. And again, the distribution logistics also have to focus on zero waste. So having a nonprofit be required to take everything that a donor has, whether they can use it or not, is simply transferring surplus from a donor and making it garbage at a nonprofit. That now that nonprofit that, believe me, has less resources than the donor, they have to find a way to deal with it. They have to throw it out. They have to pay it for an extra dumpster. They have to, spend the manpower to drive it all over town to try to find a home for it, right? So we want to make sure that we're focused on zero waste and not putting the onus on the nonprofits. So those are the challenges with the distribution. Next slide. And there, the solution is a flexible distribution network. Again, I'm not telling you something you're not already doing, right? Most of the organizations that are working to really scale up food recovery have already discovered that the food pantry system cannot handle the amount of fresh food that's generated from all of the retail locations that are donating on a given week. And if you really want to focus on getting to zero waste, you need to focus on getting as much of that food picked up and distributed as possible. That means you have to create an sort of a new alternate distribution network involving lots of different types of organizations. And so, as we know, you look to places where people are going that already need food, right? So you've got a population that needs that food. Where are they? How can we get that food to them in time for them to use it? And so subsidized housing is great. The 500 family example I gave earlier, I think that's a real partner in Pittsburgh. We have a subsidized housing community that has 500 families in it. And that's a great place to take a lot of cucumbers, for example. And I use cucumbers because cucumbers are so hard to get rid of, right? How many cucumbers does anybody need? Housing authorities, Head Start programs, food pantries and churches, of course, are an integral part of that. But they're just part of it. WIC offices and other sort of government benefit offices where people are going to talk about or receive their benefits, job training centers, and of course the list is endless, medical clinics, and all sorts of other programs. And I know that a lot of people in the food recovery world have done really creative problem solving and done things like mobile distributions, pop-up pantries, like a food truck that goes from neighborhood to neighborhood. And there's lots of great ideas there. But those are part of creating that flexible distribution network that is necessary to rescue fresh food, to keep it out of the waste stream, and to get it to where people are. The benefit of this is not just that we are reducing food waste and addressing hunger, but we're increasing food access. We're making it easier for people in need to get food, to access food. We're taking it to where they already are. So the example I always use is I was a single mother for a long time. And I had a lot of resources, right? But I would get home from work, I would be exhausted. I didn't want to cook. I would, or go clean, or I'm sorry, go shopping. I would have my groceries delivered, or I would order out. How much of a benefit is it to a single mother who doesn't have those resources when they go to pick up their kids from their Head Start programs, that they get a bag of groceries, or they get meals that they can serve for dinner, sandwiches, healthy foods, salads, things like that. So we're actually changing what food access looks like for people. And that's a really important distinction to talk about, is that these flexible distribution networks not only solve our problems, but they also create benefits for the people we serve. And I've talked about this in other webinars, the ROI of food recovery. I've talked about the benefits to investing in food recovery and the changes that it can bring to communities. But we need to be infusing that into how we talk about how food recovery is kind of different from what came before, and it's different from other solutions. Next. So, and of course, there's other considerations as well to think about when we're talking about food recovery. One is data. As we see more places like California and New York passing laws that require food recovery, we need that data. We have to have reliable access to the data for those donors. to be able to show that they are actually impacting their sort of waste bottom line. Reliability. Again, donors want that reliability. Systemic equilibrium. And this is something I didn't talk a lot about. So I'm going to take a minute here and talk about systemic equilibrium and cooperation. And that is that when you want to actually focus on keeping food out of the waste stream, it means making sure that the landscape of rescued food is where it needs to be. So early on, I was talking to an organization that served street homeless. I mean, that's one of the most vulnerable populations, probably the most vulnerable population there is. And they were buying bread. I can hear everybody gasping right now, right? They were spending like $500 a month to buy bread. That's insane. Meanwhile, another organization was picking up from a grocery store and they had so much bread, they were throwing away bread. With food recovery, with a focus on that equilibrium, we can re-rescue food. We can make sure that the organization that has too much of one thing can donate that over here to the organization that doesn't have enough. And so because we're keeping an eye on all of the different pieces of the charitable food system and the food that's out there coming from all of the donors, we can kind of move things around to where it needs to be. And I know this is really beneficial to the nonprofits too, because a lot of them are trying to do this on their own. I'm sure we've all had conversations with food pantries that are picking up from, let's say, a Trader Joe's, and they are getting massive amounts of food. They don't need that much. So they're calling people at another food pantry, soup kitchen, Meals on Wheels, saying, hey, I got some extra. Do you need it? That's taking their time and resources. They don't need to be doing that. That's what we can do. We can focus on that. They can put their time and their resources where they do the most good, which is turning food into meals for seniors or serving the people of their parish or their neighborhood the food that they need, as opposed to spending all this time trying to find homes for that. And then, of course, cooperation is working together. There's no reason for there to be competition. One thing we found when we went into some grocery stores is that they'll say, well, there's another organization that's already picking up here. That's great. I don't want to disrupt that. We're not trying to take all the food. We're just trying to make sure that all the food is taken and has a home. Do you have 7-day-a-week pickup? And most donors don't. And so you can go in and fill in and rescue that food because we're focusing on food waste as well as feeding people, and let the org that's already picking up keep the food that they're getting. And so that kind of cooperation is, I think, central to making sure that we meet both goals of food recovery, which is reducing food waste and feeding people. So how do you take this and use this when you're talking to others? And again, I think most of you know this, right? We have to be putting this up front, though. Too many leaders, elected officials, funders, community members don't understand what food recovery is. They're not thinking of it from a system approach. They're thinking of it as a one-off. We need to paint the picture for them. We need to not assume that they know what it is, but beyond that, we need to let them not assume that they know what it is as well. We need to paint the picture of how and why food recovery is a rethinking of the charitable food system. It's an addition, but a rethinking to the charitable food system. And it brings new benefits, and that's key. We are not reinventing the wheel. Funders or government agencies that are supporting food recovery are not funding food recovery instead of funding a food bank or a food pantry, right? That's essential work too. This is an and it's an and that brings new and different benefits, which is why funders need to be considering food recovery as well as the other programs that they're funding. It brings increased access, it brings nutrition security, and of course, the climate impact. And I just urge you to go back and again, think about the ROI of food recovery and be talking about how investment in systemic approach to food recovery is in fact an investment that will bring benefits. You also want to be identifying key areas of difference with existing efforts. You're not just another food pantry or food bank. You're doing something different. You're an addition. We are the and, not the or, which is my next statement. We are the and, not the or. We work with food banks. We work with food pantries. We work with all of the organizations that are already doing amazing work in the charitable food system, but we're doing something different. We are filling in the gaps and bringing some equilibrium to the system with a focus on eliminating food waste at consumer-facing businesses and, to be honest, at also charitable food locations. And then again, show them that this is system changing and therefore outcome changing, right? We are transforming the climate impact of our food system. That is really critical at this moment in time. And a lot of foundations, a lot of funders are really looking at that as climate impact becomes more severe and more expensive. So this is a system changing way to address the impact. Plus, it also is a system change and an outcome change for communities that are in need. It changes the way people access food. It gives them access to nutrition security. And sometimes it can even promote things like culturally appropriate foods as you're rescuing from grocery stores and other places that are selling culturally appropriate foods. And again, there's really so much food that's being wasted that if one community doesn't want the avocados, another one will, and we can make sure that everybody has what they need. That's really my pitch for changing the conversation around food recovery. And if you have any questions now, drop them in the chat. Okay.
Jen, we've already got two questions. I'll read them to you and you can answer. Shannon McDonald from MDE asked, in your presentation on the flexible distribution network, what are your thoughts on who owns the property where this infrastructure would be located? Who is the organization or organizations that operate the facility? How would it be funded?
Yes.
Yeah,
Excellent question. These are already existing locations. We're not creating new places. There are groups that are doing incredibly innovative work on creating new places. LA, for example, Food Finders, they are taking shipping containers and creating community access points. But what I'm talking about is going to organizations that already exist, that already have their own infrastructure, that already have their own funding to provide the services that they're funding, and giving them food to distribute to their clients as their clients come in the door. So you've got in Allegheny County, we have family support organizations. They're government funded. They provide Head Start, but they provide a lot of other programming for families. They already function. They were functioning before we started. We started working with them and bringing them food to distribute, and they give it to their clients when they come to pick up their kids or when they come in for other services, meaning it's not an extra stop for them. They already have refrigerators in their location. In some cases, organizations have added new storage, new refrigerators and freezers for the food that we bring. That is a minor cost. They're really easy to get a grant for a refrigerator for a Head Start program or a job training program that wants to provide food to people as well. A lot of them really leverage the fact that we have this partnership. We provide a lot of letters of support and promise of services to our partners because they're using that for grant funding as well.
Jessica asked, as we ultimately long for development-focused poverty efforts, which will bring people out of food insecurity and poverty, how do you see food recovery adapting to more development-focused poverty approaches?
So first off, let me say, yes, agreed. This is not going to solve poverty. And we need big changes in that front. However, people need to eat while we make those big changes. And so that's kind of where this comes in. Food recovery, I think, is already, we're seeing a somewhat of a reduction on the retail front as chains get sort of a better handle on what they're buying. It's never going to go away, though. They want to keep those shelves full, or I should say, it's probably, I don't know, 50, 100 years in the future before there's enough of a consumer change where consumers are willing to see empty shelves in order to reduce food waste. I think that food recovery, and I'd love to hear other people's perspective on this as well. Part of the adaptation is by thinking about where we're providing food access. So if we want to provide job training to folks, having food available there for people so they don't have to, learn hungry, because learn hungry is actually an oxymoron. You can't learn hungry. And I think that's part of it. I don't know if I'm getting to what you're actually asking. Long term, we could be putting ourselves out of a job. I mean, I would love to see it if food recovery was no longer needed. And if ultimately we ended hunger and we still were doing food recovery, then I don't know, give it to people who don't need it, but will eat it. Make community meals, bring people together, have events.
Omar asked, can you speak a little bit about rescuing perishable food from cafes/restaurants, like leftover food that has already been cooked and will be tossed out at COB? I'm not sure what COB
Close of
is.
business.
Close of business. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So, there's a
I-
lot of things in that question, inherent in that
Yeah,
question.
also, Jen, want to reference, we have other webinars dealing more specifically with this on our website, which I think would
Yeah,
be really good to reference and look at. But yeah, I'll let you
right,
go ahead and answer.
on rescuing perishable or cooked food. So a couple of things. One, I don't recommend, and as a policy, we don't rescue food that's been served like on a buffet for people to serve themselves. There's too much of a risk of contamination. So that's one thing. Hot food is tricky. You've got to be really careful to make sure that you are that you understand how to safely rescue hot food. I would recommend that any organization that is thinking about doing something like that, that you get ServSafe certified, ServSafe manager, or food safety trained, so you really understand how to do it safely. And then third, close of business can be hard because a lot of organizations are closed. We do have a couple of 24-hour shelters in Pittsburgh. I know a lot of big cities have that same sort of thing, and they can take food late. But I think a potentially more sustainable uh, strategy for that is to have those businesses cool that food properly and safely, and have organizations pick it up the next day. And that's what we do with most of our restaurant partners, is we pick it up the next day if the food is sort of, if close of business is late after hours.
Dana asked, there seems to be an unfriendly competition between food rescue organizations and food banks. How do you suppose we combat that, and why do you think this is?
Yeah, so I think that there's that is true. And there are a number of food recovery organizations and food banks that actually have really good symbiotic relationships. And so I think we want to take a look at those situations where you've got a nice symbiosis going, a good relationship, and see what's working there and how do we build on that. I think some of it comes from a place of fear and misunderstanding. I don't know that food recovery was sort of the upstart on the block 10 years ago, and food banks didn't know what to do with it or with them. And some of that has persisted, but I think more and more food banks are recognizing that, okay, this is something that can work well within our model. This is a benefit to us and to our pantries. Food recovery organizations can pick up a donation from a food bank partner and take it to a food bank pantry partner to reduce the burden on both organizations. I think the way we combat it is more education, more open and frank conversations, more willingness to cooperate, probably on both sides. And then the other thing I want to say is that I think there's a perception amongst some individuals in the existing charitable food network, food banks and food pantries, but particularly food banks, that food rescue isn't safe. So I think it is incumbent upon food recovery organizations to be food safety trained and make sure that your operations are in fact in keeping with food safety norms. It is absolutely possible. It's beyond possible. It's very easy to safely rescue food with volunteers in unrefrigerated vehicles. You just need to understand where the pitfalls are, where there might be danger and where there's not, and how to do it safely. And if we can do that, if we can have standards that food recovery organizations are kind of keeping to, then I think that'll dispel that misunderstanding over time.
Karina asked, one challenge that we face, this might be more of a comment, one challenge that we face with food recovery is lack of food trucks or staffing to pick up the food and distribute it. A lot of people do not want the liability of being responsible to transport the food safely and abiding by food safety rules.
So I think that that's a misunderstanding on the part of those individuals that don't want that liability. It is absolutely easy to transport food safely. We drive our groceries from the grocery store home. We have people deliver our groceries. We have DoorDash deliver us food from restaurants safely all the time. People in cars are driving around food from one place to another without any incident, like, I don't know, thousands upon thousands of times a day, millions. I don't know what the number is. That is a data point that I can't wrap my head around, but it's a lot, right? So I think that education, and I'm not sure what your organization is, but we have a network of, we have 20,000 people who have downloaded our app to do rescues in Pittsburgh, and something like 50,000 network wide in Food Rescue Hero organization. So there's plenty of people out there that are willing to pick up and drive food. It's just a matter of doing the education to let them know that it is safe and easy to do.
Alexander said, I would love to know more about how some governments have made food donations mandatory. It sounds like a huge win for food recovery that must have taken a very coordinated lobbying effort. Wish we had that here in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, California is probably, well, and New York, but California is the most notable because its law has some teeth, whereas the New York state law doesn't really have a lot of enforcement aspects in it. For California, California is facing real dire consequences of climate change. And they passed in, I think, 2016, the short-lived climate pollutant change law solution, something like that. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but addressing food waste is part of that. Food waste, if you think about landfills, right? You throw plastic in a landfill, it's bad for the environment, but it's going to take hundreds of years for that to biodegrade. Food breaks down really quickly, which means it's immediately releasing all of those climate changing gases into the climate. That was really poorly stated, but hopefully you know what I mean. And by taking it out of the landfill, you're immediately providing benefit. So I think it is, yes, a huge lobbying effort, but it's also about how we frame it and how we talk about the impact. And it's an investment. Climate change is causing billions of dollars of damage a year. And it is to our social advantage to pump the brakes on that, and taking food out of a landfill is a super easy way to do it. It's a win-win all around.
Alexander, I'd recommend looking at SB 1383, which is the California bill that, yes, just check that out. Do some reading on that.
Yeah, and
Um,
I mentioned the name just because it's really important to think about it. Like, it wasn't that they wanted to end food waste specifically, it's that they had a problem with climate change and we're looking at how to address it. And food waste is a quick, easy win, or reducing food waste is a quick, easy win.
Food for Good said, very interesting point you mentioned about reference letters for grants. Did I understand that correctly, that that Food Rescue Hero would provide a letter for grants?
Well, our partners, our Food Rescue Hero partners, so that's 412 Food Rescue, that's Food Finders, that's Hunger Network, Philly Food Rescue. When an organization that we are delivering food to comes to us and says, we're applying for funding, we're applying for this grant, we want you to write a letter saying that you are going to continue to serve us for the next year. Absolutely, we do that. And that helps those organizations get that grant money because they're able to make the case that not only are we providing our families with, education on parenting, on early childhood education, on or job training or anything like that, we're also able to provide them food, which gets them in the door to receive services and helps reduce hunger and nutrition insecurity in their households.
Stephen asked, what do you see the role of community refrigerators in food recovery? Is there anyone using that in combination with some text-based alert system to let people know that there are some items that have been stocked?
I don't know. That's a really great question. I think that would be an interesting pilot for somebody to do if they haven't already. Certainly with, RFID tags on food or the barcodes on food, you could easily scan something into a refrigerator and have it either send out alerts or have a inventory online. And I don't know of anybody who's doing that. That would be really cool. I do think that community refrigerators are a great part of food recovery and food recovery system. I'm not sure. I don't think I don't think community fridges could hold enough food to be the only solution for a food recovery organization. Like, I'm thinking again of that like 10,000 pounds of cucumbers that we got,
Yeah, I think of them as an additional supplemental
yeah.
resource that are only good. But yes.
Yeah, they're awesome. And I'm super pro community refrigerators
Yeah.
along with all of these other solutions. And again, that's that flexible distribution network that we're talking about is you need a lot of different solutions because food waste happens in all sorts of different sizes, all sorts of different times of day, also different types of food, different quantities. Like, there's just so much variability of food waste. We need variability of distribution points for it as well.
Sharon asked, in the future, can you see retailers compensating organizations during doing food recovery for their work?
I mean, I wouldn't say no, but um probably uh the there are organizations out there that are compensated for work by retailers in managing their food donations. They are, as far as I know, providing extremely extensive tax reporting information, which is really complex and difficult, but helpful to those big orgs. Um, on a smaller level, maybe it'd be a big change. It'd be a big push to get retailers to do that.
Kat said, part of food security is the availability of food that supports an active, healthy lifestyle. What can food rescue organizations do about overwhelmingly unhealthy donations as a means of supporting the healthy quality of life of those receiving it?
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about this. When I was part of the operations staff at 412 Food Rescue, Jake and I and several colleagues sat in a room, and I think we almost, I wouldn't say came to blows, but there were some very
We
strong
fought.
opinions. There were very strong opinions about this. Ultimately, what swayed me was that everybody has the right to self-determination for what they eat, what we need to do is provide choices. We can't only provide an organization with unhealthy foods. So if we get a donation of fast food or unhealthy food from a donor, we offer it to an org, but we also offer them produce and other more healthy options. And we try to make sure that all of our partners, and this is just at 412 Food Rescue, which is the org I came out of. So I can't speak for all orgs, but I'm in favor of that, of giving organizations the ability to provide choices to the people that they serve. As somebody just put in the comments, choice provides dignity. We can't police people's diets. However, we can make sure that we're not only providing them with bad food. Or not bad, that was a no judgment on the food, with fast food, or food that is less nutritionally dense.
Randy, I think this is more of a comment, but off hours food rescues, when it's necessary, can go to little free pantries and little free fridges. Yes,
exactly.
of course, true.
Yep.
An anonymous attendee asked, what can state and local governments do to support the expansion of food recovery?
Yeah, there's a lot of things they can do. And it probably depends on what what the makeup of your elected body is, the municipality or state. Obviously, best case scenario is a food waste ban, where food waste generators are required to divert it. That's not going to be politically feasible in a lot of places, but they can do things like provide more protection from liability. I know we've got the Food Donation Improvement Act and the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, but state acts let sort of signal donors that the state is supporting this. They can provide funding and grants. They can make sure that the health regulations, the Department of Health regulations are supportive of food recovery. That's just really a basic and easy thing to do right there.
I see that another anonymous attendee, and it looks like Joyce asked this in the comments. How do you resolve the issue of food pantries lacking volunteers, especially on the weekends when food rescues often occur?
So, again, this is part of that flexible distribution network, and I'm not sure whether you're talking about the transportation or the receipt. So there's two sides to this, right? And again, I'm not sure what you mean. One interpretation would be pantries can't go pick up the food. And another interpretation would be pantries can't distribute the food once it gets there. The use of volunteers to pick up food and get it where it needs to go answers that pickup problem, right? So you have volunteers that are not part of the food pantry, but that's what they're doing. They're spending an hour of their weekend, and let's see, pantry's not open to receive. Got it. Okay. That's that flexible distribution system coming in play right there. We have a lot of partners in our overall network, Food Rescue Hero Network, that are housing authorities, senior high rises, job training programs that are open on the weekends, medical clinics that are open on the weekends.
In a couple words, non-traditional food access sites that would be open on weekends.
Yeah, look for who is open on the weekend and providing services, whether that's like housing, people live there, or whether that's actual services to the people who need the food, and partner with them. They will be open. There's somebody open 7 days a week, if nothing else, a housing site.
I don't see any more questions. I'm going to move to next slide.
Great. Awesome. Jake, do you want to drop in the
Yes,
and can you advance the slide, because I can't remember what the next webinar is? There we go. So related, but this is talking about the ROI. This is talking about investing in impact, about how you can talk to funders specifically about what their return on investment is for food recovery. And I talked a little bit about this, but we're going to look at some of the numbers, like what is the impact to our healthcare system? What is the impact in, dollars spent on, addressing climate disasters, like having that data, and how do you take that data and use that to bolster your case for investment in food recovery? So we will be talking about that in February. I see one question.
Yeah, Keep Austin Fed rescues best food first, and often connects recipients directly to less nutritionally dense food. Uh,
Like self-service cupcakes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think the point of that is, that's great, Randy. Thank you for that. Is that there are a lot of different ways to figure out how to prioritize how you're spending your resources to rescue food, and what you're rescuing and where you get it to. I 100% agree that making sure people have access to fresh food is really, really important. But I think it's also important not to make the decisions for people. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. As we said earlier, the recording of this webinar will be sent out sometime within the next week, and the link to register for the next one is in the comments. So we hope to see you next time. Thanks for attending.